In addition to this conversation around health equity, it's also important to talk about this concept of decolonization in health promotion, which is a big conversation these days as well. And I'm not going to unpack fully colonization or decolonization, which are very complex concepts, and I'm not able to do that in a short lecture, but I want to give you some kind of ideas of what we mean by that and why it's important, and also what it might look like as well. So to understand decolonization, we first have to understand colonization. And when I say colonization, I mean like the setting up of colonies. So a while ago, the British, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and not just them, but they were kind of the main ones, set out to explore and discover different parts of the world. And when they arrived at different places all around, not just North and South America, but all around different parts of the world, there was a population that was already there, the indigenous population to that particular area. And nevertheless, these colonizers set up settlements all over these different lands and called them their own. This is now French land, this is now English land, this is now Spanish, Portuguese, etc. And what happened with that as well is that the indigenous population to these different lands, which are very different all around the world, they were often displaced, they were often, given disease like smallpox, sometimes purposely, they were killed, the atrocities are long, and a lot of the cultures and people themselves and languages, etc., started to disappear over years and years of these colonial practices. And again, it's a big topic. I barely scratched the surface there, but that's what I mean by colonization. And an example here in Canada of colonization, of the effects of colonization or an act of colonization, is the history of residential schools here in Canada, where starting about over 100 years ago, the Mounties and the government of Canada and the church, have made all these efforts to go into Indigenous communities, steal children from their parents, often mostly against their will, take them out of their communities and put them in these residential schools run by the church, where they were malnourished, where they were subject to various forms of violence and abuse, and where they often lost their language, where they lost their sense of community, where they lost their familial ties. And it's often said that the goal of these residential schools was to kill the Indian in the child. And this picture here by this Cree artist named Kent Mockman from Manitoba, called The Scream, really shows this concept of, the RCMP and the church under the government of Canada, both under the direction of the government of Canada, taking these children from their families. And what's interesting in this, and how this fits into a health promotion class, is I don't know what all of the motivations that were going on back then. I can't pretend to understand exactly why all of this happened. Racism is obvious as part of that, but there's many other factors like land claims, a lot of different factors that went into this. But I don't doubt that some of these people meant well, weirdly enough. I don't doubt that some of these people meant well, and that's why this fits into a health promotion class, because sometimes things are done in the name of doing well by a population, and it does the exact opposite, especially if the means of doing this good, right, are very violent and abusive, etc. So what I'm trying to say is, if I had to imagine, so I don't think everyone was evil that was doing this, that was part of this residential school policy. And I think some of them were doing it under the guise of helping people. And, we're trying to help people in health promotion, and hopefully we're doing nothing even that scratches the surface of something that could cause the harm that residential schools cause. But it's an important reminder that what we think is best for a population isn't necessarily what's best for them. And we have to understand the needs of a population and understand the diversity of that population and the, culture and spirit of a population, and work with that population to address needs that they have, as opposed to imposing our needs, using our kind of in the just general sense, not necessarily you and me, but instead of just imposing the needs of other people on a different population. And that's what happened with colonization, is that the dominant group said, this is the way it's supposed to be. This group is in our way, or they're not as good as us, or not as healthy as us, or not as whatever as us. We need to fix them, or we need to change them, or we need to control them. And that is kind of some of these elements of colonization. And this is very complex. And again, I'm worried because I'm probably not doing it enough justice, but hopefully that makes sense as to why this is a conversation in the health promotion space. So that residential school is a very drastic example, but they were around for a long time, and they only recently stopped happening, both in the US and Canada and other parts of the world. Happened in Australia as well. But examples of colonization that occur in health promotion are like that one group feels that they need to save another group. You're othering another group. You're saying, I'm better than them and I need to save them because they are disadvantaged than me. You don't, without maybe not knowing anything about that group. Another example of colonization is opposing my views, our views, whoever's views onto another group. Like, you need to be physically active because I say it's better for you. And I say it's going to improve your health. Well, does that matter to that group? Have we thought about what that group actually wants and values and what's going to be good at that for them? Do we know how, for instance, Indigenous people see physical activity and see health? Are we considering those factors? Or are we just saying that this is how I see health, this is how I see physical activity, this is how everyone else needs to see it, right? Another concept that we see often is a lack of inclusion of the voices of the community that we're trying to save in the conversation. So, for instance, me going into a racialized community and saying, this is what you need to do, right? This is how you need to change things to fix your health disparities. Have we talked to them? Do we know what's up with them? Do we know what they want? Do we have influence or voices from that group that can guide that process, so it's not just me deciding what's best for other people? Another example of colonization that's very prevalent in the research, and this has happened for a long time, is where researchers have gone into like Indigenous population or racialized communities and like done research on them, and even just like collecting data, not necessarily like putting groups through things, but even just like collecting data or collecting artifacts, taking that data, taking those artifacts and publishing them or showing them off somewhere, and that group not benefiting at all from it. So the researcher gets something out of it, but the group that we studied and we used and that helped us doesn't get anything out of it as well, right? Another example of colonization is a belief that experts are only found in like industrialized nations, valuing the voices of like North American or European experts, right, researchers, etc., over the voices of people in other communities that are less or lower income countries. And then another big example of colonization in kind of this colonial perspective in health promotion is like decisions being made far away from where they impact people. And this is something you see in governments all the time, where like decisions are made in, for instance, in Canada, in Ottawa, that affect communities in rural BC, right? Well, are these people connected? Are they talking? Do these people know anything about these people's wants, needs, and circumstances, right? That's more of a colonial approach. And when we talk about decolonization, we want to undo some of those approaches, some of those ways of viewing health and health promotion and other systemic issues. It's also like dismantling the systems that uphold privilege, power perspectives with certain groups, right? So why is it always that certain people have the best health outcomes and that everything's tailored to certain groups over others, right? How do we make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to achieve health, equal access to health, and similar health outcomes, right? Based on their individual differences as well. And can we let cultures like also self-determine, right? Not always think, and this is something that's really worth considering in health promotion, is like, do you always know what's best, right? Without considering the needs of your community. You know, you could take an evidence-based approach to a health promotion initiative, and that's great. But is that evidence-based approach actually what the community wants? And are you thinking of the community and how you're delivering things? And are their voices part of it? Are they helping you actually grow that as well? That's going to be a difference in perspective of like a colonial approach. Like, I tell you what to do because I know what's best for you because you are the lesser, right? Where a decolonized approach is like, hey, what's up? Let's build a relationship first. Let's be friends first. Let me get to know you first, right? Oh, hey, you're different. That's interesting. I'm like this. You're like that. Cool. Right? Oh, you have this problem. I wonder if this is something we can help. What would a solution look like to you? Right? You're including other people's voices in the process of health promotion. And of course, decolonization goes way beyond health promotion too, but we're talking about it in this respect. So in this article called Will Global Health Survive Its Decolonization from 2020, I like this quote, so I put it in here. In this imagined decolonized world, representation is important as how it alters the agenda, something I talked about in the health equity section as well, that it's not just about having like an Indigenous person on your committee, or a Black person, or a person from India, a person from wherever else on your committee, right? Are we listening to their voices? Or are we just having them there to check a box, right? Is having that representation actually altering the agenda? What is on the table is as important as who is around it, right? So what are we actually talking about? And are we just having our agenda and we're having that, let's say, Indigenous person there just to support our agenda? Or are we actually thinking about what agendas they might have, what things they actually want for them and their communities? It is a landscape that serves the most disadvantages and recognizes that you cannot truly help or support people, be their allies and enablers, without seeing the world through their eyes and seeing yourself as they see you. And that's why one of the most fundamental things I've learned through my own work in this area, and I have lots of work to do, I'm by no means an expert, but if there's anything I've learned is the value of relationships, and the value of getting to know people, and the value of realizing like you're not always right, and actually listening to people as opposed to just waiting for your opportunity to speak. And also of like realizing that your way isn't always the correct way, especially when it comes to other people, right? I love this line: respect and humility are vaccines against supremacy. So if we actually have conversations with people, and I know right now the world is set up so we're not even talking to each other. Groups that disagree, they're not even talking to each other. And they're just like, you're wrong, you're wrong. I don't believe that gets us anywhere either, right? We have to listen to different people, listen to different groups, and actually consider, you know, how their worldview, their outlook on life might be substantially different than ours. Okay. And this brings in this concept of what's sometimes called two-eyed seeing, which is a concept that was really brought to prominence by someone named Elder Marshall. And two-eyed seeing, so like seeing through both eyes, right? Not just seeing through one eye, seeing through both eyes, right? So two-eyed seeing refers to learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western ways of knowing. So it's like, it's not saying that like Indigenous ways of knowing, or like the ways of knowing of a different population, it's not saying that that's the ultimate way of seeing. I'm not saying that like Indigenous people have it all figured out either. No group has it all figured out, right? But it's like there are strengths to that lens. And there's also strengths to a Western science lens, 100%. But they're different. And we can't say that only one is valuable, you know? An Indigenous way worldview often, like I said, it's really focused on relationships. It's really focused on reciprocity, like back and forth, not just taking. You know, it's based on more of a holistic view of health as well, right? And a Western view of health and science, you know, it's really about inquiry. It's about being systematic in your approach. It's about reductionism a lot of times as well, and like, you know, cause and effect. And both of those have their strengths, right? And two-eyed seeing is like using those different strengths to create a more complete worldview. And we can go beyond two-eyed seeing and actually talk about like multi-eyed seeing, right? Where we're not just talking about like Western science and indigenous ways of knowing, but we're also talking about like what is seen in other cultures and perspectives. You know, what can we learn from from Chinese perspectives? What can we learn from perspectives from people from certain parts of South America? What can we learn from people from Nigeria, from Oman, from all these different parts in the world? What can we gain from that? It's not about like saying one's better than other, but like opening up our eyes so we stop being so reductionist in the way we do things and we only value certain perspectives over others. Okay, so that's all fine and good. But what does this actually look like in practice? It's hard to say. And there are lots of debates on what we mean by decolonization. And there's debates also on what we mean by things like reconciliation, which is a big loaded term as well. But I wanted to bring in one example of a project that is looking to decolonize the approach to health. And this is a local example from UBC, the University of British Columbia, where they have the Urban Aboriginal Community Garden project. And this is a project that's run by Indigenous individuals at UBC, and people can come in, they can tend to the garden, they can learn food skills, they can build community with the people that are there. Students can volunteer as well. The mission of the garden project is to provide the support and opportunity for Aboriginal people living in East Van to improve their health and capacity by experiencing a seed to table aspect. Right? A safe space for elders and youth to interact to promote healing through gardening. Love it. This is run by someone named Cease Weiss. Hopefully I'm pronouncing her name right, who also runs the community garden in North Van as well. Okay, so there has been some evaluation on this process, and actually the evaluation process reflects more of a decolonized approach as well. And this is a bit of a shift away from how we've been doing science, or you've learned about science in your BBK degree, because you've probably learned that the way to do science is a little bit more quantitative than qualitative. And it's all about numbers and results and effect sizes and stats, etc. And don't get me wrong, those are important, but how the program was evaluated actually shows how we could use other approaches to evaluate the success of a project. So in this, a decolonized approach to health promotion in Canada, the case of the Urban Aboriginal Community Garden project, which was written by Mundell and Chapman in 2010. The authors conducted 10 semi-structured interviews, 5 with project leaders, 5 with project participants, as well as number of follow-up interviews, right? Guiding questions were developed in conversation with project participants. So again, it wasn't like, let's say I'm a non-Indigenous person and I come in and I'm like, okay, I'm going to evaluate your project. This is how I'm going to evaluate it. It's like, no, this is for the community. This is about the community. The community should also be involved in what does success look like? Like, how do we know we're doing something of worth here? And what does worth mean? Right? We develop those questions. We develop how we run the interviews with the members of the community that are affected by the project. The outcomes, they're less quantitative in this case, but you can see the beauty of some of these outcomes as well. So Peggy, these are quotes from from the article, but from some of the participants. Peggy, a dedicated project participant, explained that part of what made the project feel like a comfortable and welcoming place was the way project leaders seemed to get her. Yeah, because it's the community that's running the project, right? And understand her context, a sentiment expressed by many other participants. Cease, the project's cultural coordinator, described it as an empowerment tool for Indigenous people, which empowers because it is their own experience, as nobody's telling them how to react. This is like a real learning experience. It's not like anyone's twisting my arm to go there. Participants also felt confident the skills that they were developing and found that the project demystified cooking for them. Ron proposed that the project creates a safe space for people to talk and get support. And we're not therapists, but we talk about things and we allow people to have a forum to talk to each other and us about things. These conversations over lunch or in the garden would often include non-Aboriginal university students who were at the farm working on other projects. but invited to join in for a meal. Okay, so it became like a family. And again, this whole decolonization, health promotion, huge topic, but I wanted to give you kind of an understanding of what we mean by it and what it could potentially look like. But it's a theme that's going to come up throughout the semester, so I wanted to set the stage with this concept.